5 American wars. 5 families that got rich from every single one. This is not speculation, these are government contracts. Let me show you the pattern that has generated billions for the same dynasties while millions died. There is a business model in American history that is more profitable than oil, more consistent than banking, and more protected than any monopoly. It has made the same families wealthy for 6 generations, creating dynasties that control billions in assets, fund political careers, and build university endowments. While your ancestors held rifles, these families held calculators. While soldiers died and taxpayers paid, a small group of companies always won. The pattern is built on a simple, brutal premise: profit from war, every war, any war, regardless of the cause, regardless of the enemy, and regardless of the cost to the public. Because while the battlefield is chaotic, the ledger is always orderly. We are looking at a specific list of beneficiaries: the DuPonts, who mastered explosives and chemicals, profiting from the Revolutionary War through Iraq; the Rockefellers, who monopolized oil and fuel, controlling energy from the Civil War through Afghanistan; the Morgan banking dynasty, who financed the conflicts, lending to governments from the Spanish-American War through World War II; the predecessors of Lockheed Martin, who have dominated aviation and weapons contracts for over a century; and Halliburton, the company that industrialized military logistics and mastered the art of the no-bid contract from World War II to the War on Terror. This isn't conspiracy. This is capitalism applied to conflict. And today we are going to open the ledger. We will track the money, war by war, contract by contract, dollar by dollar. Let us begin with the family that literally invented the American military-industrial complex. The blueprint for this entire system began in 1802 on the banks of the Brandywine River in Delaware. Éluge DuPont, a French chemist, didn't just build a gunpowder mill. He built a mechanism for extracting wealth from conflict. He saw that a young, expanding America had a constant need for explosives, for mining, for clearing land, but primarily for war. By the War of 1812, DuPont was already the government's preferred supplier. This established the first rule of the pattern, which is positioning. When you were the company that delivered during the last war, you were automatically first in line for the next one. You become the default setting for the military's supply chain. The Civil War, fought from 1861 to 1865, was the test case for the morality of this business model. The Union Army required gunpowder on an industrial scale never seen before in human history. We are talking about millions of rounds fired across hundreds of battles over 4 years of continuous slaughter. DuPont's mills ran 24 hours a day, producing over 4 million pounds of powder. But here is the detail that doesn't make it into standard history books. The DuPont family were Northern Democrats who opposed abolition. Some family members even supported the Confederacy politically. Yet they sold their gunpowder to the Union. Why? Because that is where the contracts were. That is where the liquidity was. Ideology didn't matter. Profit did. By the time the war ended, the complexity of their political stance was forgotten, washed away by a patriotic narrative, while the profit remained securely in their accounts. If the Civil War made them rich, World War I made them a dynasty. Before the United States even entered the conflict in 1917, DuPont was already selling millions of pounds of TNT and smokeless powder to Britain and France. When America finally joined the war, DuPont's production didn't just grow, it went exponential. They supplied 40% of all explosives used by Allied forces. Look at the financials. In 1914, DuPont's net earnings were $5 million. By 1918, that number was $82 million. That is a 1,600% increase in profits in just 4 years. Most companies would cash out after a windfall like that. DuPont doubled down. They did not return the excess profits to the government. Instead, they used this massive injection of war capital to diversify. They pivoted into chemicals, plastics, and synthetic materials. This is the most critical insight of the DuPont file. War profits were used to build a peacetime empire. The nylon in your clothes, the Teflon in your kitchen, the chemicals in your home, these industries were effectively seeded by the gunpowder profits of World War I. They proved that if you survive the war with the cash, you own the peace. But the DuPont story does not end with traditional explosives. As World War II approached, the government needed something deadlier, and DuPont was the only contractor with the capacity to deliver it. This opens a chapter often omitted from corporate biographies: the Manhattan Project. While history focuses on the scientists at Los Alamos, the industrial reality was managed by DuPont. The government asked DuPont to design, construct, and operate the plutonium production complex at Hanford, Washington. This was not a standard contract. It was a cost-plus fixed-fee contract, on a scale never attempted. DuPont built the reactors that produced the plutonium for the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. By integrating themselves into the nuclear age, DuPont ensured their relevance for the next 50 years of the Cold War. They transitioned from the merchants of gunpowder to the architects of the atomic age. The Savannah River site, a nuclear materials processing center crucial to the hydrogen bomb program, was also built and operated by DuPont. The pattern here is evolution. As the methods of killing became more sophisticated, from black powder to plutonium, the same family remained at the helm of production. They didn't just supply the military. They became the industrial infrastructure of the Pentagon itself. Now we turn to the resource that every modern military requires. Not ammunition, but the energy to deliver it. John J. Rockefeller understood this before the Pentagon did. By 1880, he didn't just run a business. He controlled 90% of America's oil refining capacity through Standard Oil. This monopoly was a strategic weapon. When the Spanish-American War began in 1898, the U.S. Navy was transitioning from coal to oil-powered ships. Suddenly, Rockefeller's product wasn't just a commodity. It was a matter of national security. He learned the lesson that would define the 20th century. Control the fuel, and you control the military. World War I was the first industrial war. Tanks, trucks, airplanes, and ships all ran on petroleum. The Rockefeller successor companies, specifically Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron, supplied the fuel for the U.S. military and the Allies. But here is where the Rockefeller strategy diverged from DuPont. They didn't just sell to one side. Standard Oil's German subsidiary sold fuel to Germany. Even after America entered the war, Rockefeller companies traded with the enemy through neutral countries. And this was technically legal because the companies were separate entities, but the result was unified profit. This wasn't treason in their eyes. It was just business. The pattern became darker in World War II. Standard Oil of New Jersey was investigated for trading with Nazi Germany through subsidiaries. The investigation uncovered that Standard Oil had shared critical patents for synthetic rubber with IG Farben, the German chemical giant, even after the war had begun. This technology transfer gave Germany the ability to prolong the war. Who discovered this? Senator Harry Truman. Before he was president, he led the committee investigating these abuses. His conclusion was blunt. He stated that Standard Oil's actions had damaged the American war effort. So, who went to prison? No one. The investigation was quietly shelved. Why? Because the U.S. military needed Rockefeller fuel to run their tanks and fly their bombers. The company was simply too important to prosecute. The contracts continued, the profits flowed, and the immunity was absolute. But the Rockefeller influence extends far beyond selling barrels of oil. To understand the true scale of this pattern, we must look at how corporate interests direct foreign policy. The clearest example is not a world war, but a covert operation. In 1953, the CIA orchestrated a coup in Iran, known as Operation Ajak. The democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, had committed an unforgivable sin. He nationalized Iran's oil industry, threatening the profits of Western oil companies. The U.S. government didn't send diplomats, they sent agents to overthrow the government and install the Shah, a dictator friendly to Western oil interests. Who benefited? The successor companies of the Rockefeller Empire gained access to 40% of Iran's oil production. This established a new, dangerous precedent. The American military and intelligence apparatus effectively became the private security force for oil conglomerates. Throughout the Cold War and later in the Middle East, the pattern repeated. American troops were deployed to regions not to protect American premiums, but to protect American pipelines. When you look at the map of U.S. military bases in the Middle East and overlay it with a map of major oil fields, the match is nearly perfect. The Rockefeller legacy is not just wealth, it is the geopolitical doctrine that oil is worth more than blood. But wars do not just consume ammunition and fuel, they consume capital. J.P. Morgan understood a fundamental truth of geopolitics. Governments at war will borrow at any rate because the alternative to debt is defeat. While DuPont provided the explorers and Rockefeller provided the fuel, Morgan provided the credit card. This relationship was tested in the Spanish-American War, but World War I was the main event. Between 1914 and 1917, the United States was officially neutral, but American finance was not. Led by J.P. Morgan, American banks lent over $2 billion to Britain and France. That is, over $50 billion in today's money. This wasn't charity. The money circularized. Morgan lent to the Allies. The Allies used the funds to buy supplies from American companies like DuPont, and the interest flowed back to the banks. But this created a lethal financial trap. By 1917, Britain and France owed so much that their defeat would have triggered a catastrophic financial crisis in America. If the Allies lost, the loans would default. If the loans defaulted, American banks would collapse. Neutrality became mathematically impossible. When President Wilson asked Congress to declare war in April 1917, the official reason was German aggression. The financial reason was solvency. During the debate, Senator George Norris of Nebraska stripped away the patriotic veneer. He told Congress explicitly that we are going into war upon the command of gold. He warned that by entering the conflict to secure these banking interests, we are about to put the dollar sign on the American flag. He voted no. Congress voted yes. The U.S. military was effectively deployed to secure J.P. Morgan's balance sheet. The profit didn't stop when the shooting did. After the war, Germany owed reparations to the Allies, and the Allies owed debt to America. Morgan arranged the loans that allowed Germany to pay the Allies, so the Allies could pay Morgan. Through the Dawes Plan in 1924 and the Young Plan in 1999, Morgan bankers refinanced billions in war debt, collecting fees at every single step of the circle. However, the most profound impact of the banking dynasty on war was the creation of a system that allows for endless conflict. We must talk about inflation and the Federal Reserve. Before 1913, wars were limited by the amount of gold in the Treasury. You could only fight as long as you could pay. The Morgan Circle was instrumental in the creation of the Federal Reserve, a central bank that could print money, This changed the physics of war. Now governments could borrow indefinitely. This leads to the hidden tax of war, inflation. When the government prints money to buy tanks and missiles, the value of the currency in your pocket goes down, the cost of living goes up. This is a wealth transfer. The banks and defense contractors get the new money first, at full value. By the time that money trickles down to the soldier or the worker, prices have risen. The Morgan legacy is the financialization of war, turning conflict into a source of perpetual interest payments, paid for by the invisible tax of inflation on the working class. The Morgan family is no longer involved in day-to-day banking, but the fortune remains, estimated at $30 billion, built on interest collected while soldiers paid the principal with their lives. Now we examine the hardware. The Lockheed brothers founded their aircraft company in 1912, but it was World War II that transformed them from an experimental workshop into a pillar of the state. The P-38 Lightning fighter was their breakthrough, with over 10,000 units produced, but building planes was just the entry point to dominate for a century. They had to invent a new economic mechanism. They didn't just build weapons, they built relationships with the Pentagon, hiring former military officers as executives to ensure the contracts never stopped flowing. And this brings us to the most dangerous term in government contracting, cost plus. Almost every major war contract operates on this basis. It means the contractor bills the government for all expenses plus a guaranteed percentage of profit. Understand the perverse incentive here. In a normal business, you maximize profit by lowering costs. In a cost-plus environment, you maximize profit by increasing costs. If a project goes over budget, the government covers the difference. If it takes longer, the contractor makes more money. They cannot lose. The risk is 100% socialized. The profit is 100% privatized. The perfect execution of this model is the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter program. The original budget was $233 billion. The current estimate is over $1.7 trillion. That is, trillion with a T. It is 7 times over budget and years behind schedule. In any other industry, this would be bankruptcy. In the defense industry, it is a success story. Lockheed Martin gets paid for every overrun because the Pentagon cannot cancel. They have already invested too much. Why can't Congress stop it? Because Lockheed didn't just engineer a plane, they engineered the politics. The F-35 program has suppliers intentionally located in 45 different states. Do the math. That means 90 U.S. senators have constituents whose jobs depend on this contract. Voting against the F-35 means voting to fire your own voters. This is called Senate proofing. It is a form of protection racketeering where the hostage is the American economy. But there is a darker layer to the Lockheed file, one that exists completely outside of public scrutiny. This is the world of the black budget. A significant portion of U.S. defense spending is classified. It goes to programs that do not appear in public ledgers, often developed in secret facilities like Lockheed's famous Skunk Works. Here, billions of dollars disappear into the development of spy planes, stealth technology, and surveillance systems. Because these programs are classified, they are effectively immune to audit. This lack of accountability allows for margins that would be illegal in the civilian world. When the Pentagon cannot account for trillions of dollars in assets, as has been reported in multiple failed audits, much of that ambiguity lies in the classified contracts held by giants like Lockheed. They have created a parallel economy where the consumer, the taxpayer, is not allowed to see the receipt. It is a closed loop of money and secrecy, justified by national security, but driven by corporate growth. If Lockheed builds the weapons, Halliburton builds the war zone itself. But their true innovation wasn't engineering, it was the perfection of the revolving door, the seamless transfer of personnel between the Pentagon and the private sector. The case study is Richard B. Cheney. In 1991, as Secretary of Defense, he oversaw the first Gulf War. In 1995, he became CEO of Halliburton. In 2000, he became Vice President of the United States. And then the wars began. During his tenure as Vice President, Halliburton's government contracts increased by 400%. Coincidence is not a term used in forensic accounting. When the Iraq War started in 2003, Halliburton's subsidiary, KBR, was awarded contracts worth nearly $40 billion. The most controversial part, they were no-bid contracts. The government's justification was urgency. They claimed there was no time for competitive bidding because the troops needed support immediately. This handed Halliburton a monopoly on military logistics. They built the bases, cooked the food, did the laundry, and supplied the fuel. War had been fully privatized. With a cost-plus monopoly, the fraud was brazen. Pentagon auditors found that Halliburton had billed the government for millions of meals that were never served to soldiers. They billed for fuel deliveries that never happened. They charged for construction projects that were never completed. When questioned, the company argued that war zones are chaotic, and some waste is inevitable. The government agreed and kept paying. But financial waste is the least of the crimes in the Halliburton file. The true cost of the cost-plus model is human. To maximize profits on their logistics contracts, Halliburton's subsidiary, KBR, cut corners on waste disposal. Instead of building proper incinerators or recycling centers, they dug massive open-air pits, known as burn pits, at bases across Iraq and Afghanistan. Into these pits, they threw everything: tires, batteries, medical waste, plastics, and chemicals. Then they doused it all in jet fuel and set it on fire. These fires burned 24 hours a day, spewing toxic, carcinogenic smoke directly into the lungs of sleeping soldiers. Soldiers came home coughing up black slime, developing rare cancers, and dying of respiratory failure. KBR knew the risks. Internal memos show they were aware of the environmental regulations they were violating. But shipping waste out or building proper incinerators would have cost money, eating into the margin. Burning it was cheap. When the soldiers sued, Halliburton argued that as a government contractor acting during wartime, they had immunity. The legal battles dragged on for years. This is the ultimate expression of the pattern. The corporation gets the profit, the taxpayer pays the bill, and the soldier absorbs the toxicity. It is a complete inversion of duty. The logistics company paid to support the troops ended up poisoning them to save a percentage point on the balance sheet. But the control exerted by these 5 families is not limited to physical battlefields. To ensure this machine keeps running, they had to conquer one final territory: public opinion. This leads us to the think tank industrial complex. You might wonder why. Whenever a new conflict erupts, the same retired generals and security experts appear on cable news to advocate for military intervention. Who pays them? Follow the money. The top think tanks in Washington, D.C., the organizations that write the white papers justifying new wars, receive tens of millions of dollars from Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. The defense contractors fund the independent researchers, who then write reports stating that the world is more dangerous and we need more weapons. These reports are handed to Congress, who use them to justify the budget. It is a closed loop of intellectual corruption. They have successfully monetized fear. They don't just supply the solution to the war, they manufacture the demand for it. By controlling the narrative, they ensure that peace is always framed as weakness and diplomatic engagement is framed as appeasement. Sociologists call this the iron triangle, the ungrateful bond between the Pentagon, the defense industry, and Congress. But it is more accurate to call it a wealth extraction engine. It turns public fear into private quarterly earnings. When you assemble the files on DuPont, Rockefeller, Morgan, Lockheed, and Halliburton, you stop seeing random events. You see an algorithm. It is a 7-step cycle that is repeated for 150 years. Step 1. Position. Establish the company as essential before the conflict begins. Step 2. The no bid. When war starts, use the emergency excuse to bypass competition and secure the first contract immediately. Step 3. Cost plus. Eliminate risk. And build the government for every expense plus guaranteed profit. Step 4. The overrun. Underbid to get in, then revise estimates upward. As seen with the F-35, once the government is invested, they will pay anything to avoid admitting failure. Step 5. The revolving door. Hire the generals and regulators who awarded you the contracts to ensure the next generation of deals. Step 6. Lobby for war. Fund the think tanks and politicians that advocate for military intervention. Step 7. Diversify. Use war profits to buy peacetime assets so the wealth survives the peace. So, what is the total bill? If we tally the publicly available contract values for these 5 families and their corporate successors since their respective starts, the number is staggering. DuPont, Rockefeller, Morgan, Lockheed, Halliburton. Together, they have extracted over $485 billion from the American Treasury. But that is just the direct line item. If you include indirect profits, stock appreciation, and industries built using war capital, the figure crosses $1 trillion. Numbers this large are abstract. Let's make it concrete. Let's look at what that money could have purchased if it hadn't been converted into explosives and fuel. $485 billion is enough to fund tuition-free college for every American student for 20 years. It is enough to build a high-speed rail network connecting every major U.S. city. It is enough to repair every bridge and road in the country or fund universal health care for a decade. But we didn't build those things. Instead, we bought logistics for wars that dragged on for decades. Understand this. The money wasn't lost. It didn't disappear, it was transferred. Every dollar of debt that future generations will have to repay was income for a shareholder in one of these 5 dynasties. It is the greatest transfer of public wealth to private hands in history, justified by the one word that shuts down all debate. So, ask yourself the final question. Did anyone go to jail? The answer is no. DuPont was investigated for monopoly. They are the system. They are the engine of the economy and the arsenal of the state. They are too essential to prosecute. 5 families, 5 companies, 150 years, one identical pattern. Position before the crisis, secure the no-bid contract, overrun the costs, hire the regulators, lobby for more conflict, and profit while others die. This is not a history lesson. It is a forecast. Next time you see a headline about a new war or a sudden escalation in a foreign land, do not ask why. Ask who. Ask which of these 5 portfolios just increased in value. If you want to understand how power actually works, subscribe to this channel, because they are certainly not going to teach you this in school. They will tell you it is patriotism. We will show you the receipts. This is financial money history, and this dossier is never closed.